In 1997, NOAA hydrophones in the South Pacific detected a sound. It was ultra-low frequency and incredibly loud. They called it the Bloop. Scientists told the public it was an icequake, a massive iceberg cracking in Antarctica. They lied. I was the audio engineer on duty that night. Ice doesn't have a rhythm. Ice doesn't breathe. The sound didn't come from the ice shelves. It came from a depth of 30,000 feet, from an uncharted trench. For 20 years, we thought it was sleeping. But yesterday, the sensors picked it up again. And this time, the sound is getting louder. It's coming up. 2024. The mission was funded by a private billionaire, Elias Thorne. He didn't care about science. He cared about what the sonar had found, a massive energy signature at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Our vessel was the Titan II. Reinforced with a carbon titanium alloy, it was designed to withstand 8 tons of pressure per square inch. It looked like a spaceship built for hell. As I climbed into the hatch, the smell of grease and recycled air hit me. I looked at the dark water below. It looked like ink. I had a feeling that once we went down, we weren't coming back up. There were 3 of us. Captain Miller, ex-Navy, a man who respected the ocean. Dr. Anya, a marine biologist who was there for the discovery. And Thorne, the man paying the bills. The hatch sealed with a heavy metallic thud. The airlock hissed. We were sealed in a tin can, separated from instant death by 5 inches of glass and metal. "Systems green," Miller said, his voice flat. "Releasing ballast." The ship lurched. The waves covered the viewport. The blue sky disappeared, replaced by the churning gray of the surface water. The descent had begun. At 200 meters, the sunlight began to fail. We entered the twilight zone. The ocean turned a deep, bruising purple. The radio chatter from the surface ship, the Atlas, was still clear. "Good luck, Titan. Depth checks every 15 minutes. I watched the depth gauge. 500 meters, 800 meters. The last traces of light vanished. Outside the window, there was nothing but eternal night. We turned on the exterior floodlights. The beams cut through the water like lightsabers in a void, illuminating nothing, just endless, crushing water. We crossed the 1,000-meter mark. The midnight zone. No sunlight has touched this water for millions of years. The only thing visible outside was marine snow, dead organic matter falling from the surface. It looked like white dust suspended in a black room. It was peaceful in a terrifying way. "Sonar is cleared," Thorne said, watching the screens greedily. "No obstacles." "But Dr. Kerr..." Anya was staring out the viewport. "It's too quiet," she whispered. "Usually there are squids here. Lanternfish. Where is everything?" The ocean wasn't just empty, it was hiding. "At 3,000 meters, the hull groaned. "Creaak." It was a sound that vibrated in your teeth, metal compressing under the weight of 3 kilometers of water. Miller checked the gauges. "Structural integrity is at 98%. "It's normal settling," he assured us. But his knuckles were white on the controls. We all knew the math. At this depth, a pinhole leak wouldn't just wet us, it would cut us in half like a water jet laser. We were intruders in a high-pressure tomb, and then the sonar pinged. At 4,200 meters, the sonar alarm blared. "Contact!" Miller shouted. Bottom approaching fast. We looked at the charts. It didn't make sense. The Mariana Trench is supposed to be 11 kilometers deep. We weren't even halfway down. "It must be a seamount," Thorne said, dismissing it. "An underwater mountain range not on the maps." We slowed our descent. The radar showed a massive, flat surface rising up to meet us. It stretched for miles in every direction. We weren't landing in a trench, we were landing on a plateau. Miller engaged the thrusters for a soft landing. We braced for the impact of metal on rock, but there was no clang, no crunch of gravel, just a dull, muffled thud. The vessel shifted slightly, like it had landed on a thick mattress. "Stable," Miller reported, checking the sensors. "But the ground composition is weird. Sonar isn't reading it as basalt or granite. It's absorbing the sound waves." I looked out the bottom viewport. The ground was black, wrinkled, and looked leathery. The thrusters kicked up a massive cloud of sediment, blinding the cameras. We waited for it to settle, but the dust didn't act like sand. It hung in the water, thick and gelatinous. Dr. Anya leaned closer to the glass. "That's not silt," she murmured. "Look at how it sticks to the glass. It's mucus." The realization made my skin crawl. We hadn't kicked up sand. We had disturbed a layer of organic slime. The silence in the cabin was heavy. We were sitting on something that was producing waste. The cloud finally drifted away, revealing the floor clearly for the first time. Thorne zoomed the external camera in. It wasn't rock, it was textured. Deep, rugged valleys of dark material that stretched endlessly. And then we saw the pores. Massive, breathing holes the size of manhole covers, releasing small bubbles of gas. "My God," Anya whispered, backing away from the screen. "That's not the sea floor, that's skin." We weren't on a mountain. We were parked on the back of something that was sleeping. Before we could launch, the ground shifted. A massive earthquake shook the Titan II, throwing us against our harnesses. But it wasn't tectonic, it was muscular. Directly beneath our front viewport, the black landscape split open. A membrane, thick as a blast door, slid back. And then it looked at us. A gigantic, glowing yellow eye, larger than a football stadium, stared up from the darkness. The pupil constricted as it focused on the light of our tiny ship. We hadn't found the bottom. We had woken it up, the eye blinked. Then the world moved. We weren't just shaken, we were blasted. The creature didn't just stand up, it displaced millions of gallons of water in a second. The shockwave hit the Titan II like a physical blow. The submarine spun violently, alarms screaming as the gyroscopes failed. We were thrown against the walls. Miller fought the controls, but thrusters are useless when the entire ocean is moving against you. We were just a bubble caught in the wake of a waking god. As we spun, the floodlights caught glimpses of it. It wasn't a whale, it wasn't a squid, it was architectural. It was a mountain of flesh and scales, rising miles high. We saw dorsal spines the size of skyscrapers. We saw scars that looked like ancient trenches. Thorne was staring at the screen, paralyzed. "It's impossible," he muttered. "Biology doesn't support this size." He was right. On land, gravity would crush it. But down here, in the zero gravity of the deep, it had grown without limits for eons. Then came the sound. The same sound NOAA recorded in 1997. The bloop. It wasn't just a noise, it was a pressure wave. It vibrated through the titanium hull and hit us in the chest. It felt like standing in front of a jet engine. My nose started bleeding. Dr. Anya screamed as her eardrums ruptured. The glass of the viewport flexed inward, groaning under the sonic assault. If it roared again, the ship wouldn't just leak, it would shatter into dust. We thought the giant was the only threat. We were wrong. As the behemoth moved, it shook off its passengers. Something slammed into the front viewport. It looked like a sea louse, but it was the size of a minivan. A pale, multi-legged scavenger that lived on the giant's skin. Its screeches, scratching the reinforced glass with hooks meant for tearing dead flesh. Then another one hit the side. And another. We were being swarmed by the parasites of the Leviathan. To them, our metal shell was just a nut to be cracked open. Miller fired the emergency ballast to surface. "Blowing tanks! We need to go up!" But we didn't go up. We went down. The movement of the giant creature created a massive vacuum, a slipstream of water dragging everything behind it. We were caught in its wake. The depth gauge spun wildly. 5,000 meters, 6,000 meters. We weren't driving the ship anymore, we were falling. The parasites held on, riding us down into the crushing dark where even the monsters are afraid to go. The fall ended with a bone-jarring impact. We didn't hit mud, we hit something hard. Metal screamed as the Titan II skidded across the bottom, finally coming to a halt on its side. Then, silence. Total, absolute darkness. My head was spinning. I could hear the hiss of a ruptured hydraulic line and the ragged breathing of Captain Miller. "Status?" I croaked. "Main power is dead," Miller groaned, flipping switches that did nothing. "We are running on emergency batteries. Life support is at 50%. We were alive. But down here, alive just means dying slowly. Miller cracked a glow stick, bathing the cabin in a sickly green light. He shone it on the analog depth gauge. We froze. The needle was buried past the maximum mark. 14,000 meters. That's impossible. The deepest known point on Earth is 11,000 meters. We had fallen into a fissure inside the trench, a hole within a hole. We were deeper than any human had ever been. We were in the basement of the world, and the pressure, I could feel it pressing against my temples, waiting for the hull to give up. Thorne managed to reboot the exterior cameras. When the floodlights flickered on, we gasped. We weren't on a rock shelf, we were in a graveyard. Lying in the silt were ships, dozens of them. I saw the rotten wooden ribs of a 17th century Spanish galleon. Next to it lay the crushed hull of a Word German U-boat. Further away, a modern luxury yacht. They hadn't just sunk, they had been dragged here. This was the feeding ground. The current we got caught in, it was a funnel. This is where everything lost at sea ends up. But beyond the graveyard there was something else. Shadows that were too straight to be nature. "Look at the sonar," Anya whispered. "Those aren't rocks." Rising from the black silt were towers. Massive, monolithic structures made of smooth, black stone. They weren't built by humans. The angles were wrong, twisting in ways that hurt your eyes. It looked like a city, silent and dead, waiting in the crushing dark. We thought we were discovering biology. We had discovered a civilization, and the windows of those towers were glowing. We were staring at the ruins when the sound started, a high-pitched whistle, hiss. A fine mist of water was spraying from a hairline crack near the hatch. At this depth, that mist was like a knife. "Hull breach!" Miller shouted, grabbing the sealant gun. He sprayed the foam over the crack, but we all saw it. The hull was compromised, and worse, the CO2 scrubbers were offline. The air was already getting stale. We had maybe 2 hours of oxygen left. And outside, the parasites were scratching at the hull again. The CO2 levels were rising. The scrubbers were dead. Miller made a decision. "There's a manual override for the ballast tanks," he said, pointing to the exterior hull schematics. "But it's on the outside." He climbed into the EXO suit, a one-man atmospheric diving system. It wasn't just a suit, it was a walking tank. Built to withstand 15,000 psi, it weighed half a ton. As the hydraulic clamps sealed him inside, he looked like a knight in futuristic armor. "I'll release the tanks manually," Miller said through the comms. Then we shoot up like a cork. We didn't tell him that the chances of the suit holding at this depth were near zero. The airlock cycled. Water flooded the chamber. Miller stepped out into the abyss. Through the external cameras we watched him. He moved slowly, fighting the density of the water. Every step kicked up clouds of black silt. The silence was absolute. "I'm out," Miller's voice crackled over the radio. "Visibility is 5 meters. It's cold." He was walking on the bottom of the world, a place where no human had ever stood. Around him, the rusted hull of the German U-boat loomed like a sleeping beast. Miller began the trek toward the tail of the sub. He had to walk past the graveyard. "This U-boat!" Miller panted. "It's torn open, like a tin can." He shone his light inside the wreckage. There were no bodies, no bones, just emptiness. Whatever lived down here didn't leave scraps. As he passed the galleon, he froze. "Did you see that?" he whispered. On the edge of his light beam, something tall and pale had moved behind a rock. Not a fish, something with limbs. "Keep moving, Miller," Thorne ordered. "Focus on the ballast." He reached the manual release lever, but it was jammed by debris. He had to go around, which brought him closer to the black towers. Up close, they were even more terrifying. The obsidian walls weren't smooth. They were covered in carvings, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them, and they were humming. A low-frequency vibration that Miller could feel through his suit boots. "It's active," Miller said, his voice trembling. "This isn't a ruin, it's a machine. The whole city is a machine." And it was powered by something inside the central temple. Near the base of the tower, Miller saw it. An object that didn't belong. It wasn't rock, it was a sphere, perfectly round, about the size of a basketball. It was glowing with a soft, rhythmic blue light. It pulsed in sync with the heartbeat of the mountain. "Thorne, look at this," Miller said. Against protocol, he reached out with his manipulator claw. The moment he touched it, the hum turned into a shriek. The lights in the city flared bright, blinding white. "We hadn't just found a battery, we had rung the doorbell." The flare of light died down, returning us to darkness. But the city had changed. "Miller, behind you!" Thorne screamed over the comms, but it was too late. The shadows on the obsidian walls began to detach. They weren't carvings, they were sentinels, hibernating against the stone for centuries. They unfolded their limbs, long, spindly arms with webbed claws. They were humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. And their faces, they had no mouths, just smooth skin and 4 glowing eyes. Miller spun around, raising his manipulator claw. "Get back!" he yelled. He swung the heavy metal arm, catching one of the creatures in the chest. It didn't bleed red. It bled black ink. The creature shrieked, a sound that cut through the water and the radio static. But for everyone he hit, 2 more appeared. They moved with fluid, impossible speed, darting around his bulky suit like barracudas. They weren't trying to bite him. They were dismantling him. They were ripping at the hydraulic hoses and the oxygen lines of the EXO suit. A warning light flashed in Miller's HUD. "Suit integrity critical," the computer chimed. Water was leaking into his helmet. He looked at the Titan II. Then he looked at the manual ballast release lever 10 feet away. He realized the math. He couldn't fight them off and get back to the airlock. "Thorne, Anya," Miller's voice was calm now. "I'm releasing the weights. You're going home." Before we could scream, no, Miller fired his suit's thrusters, not toward the ship, but toward the lever. He slammed his robotic fist into the release mechanism. The ship groaned. Clang! The magnetic clamps disengaged, and 4 tons of lead ballast dropped to the ocean floor. The Titan II shot upward like a rocket. The G-force pinned us to our seats. On the rear monitor, I watched Miller. He wasn't moving anymore. The pale shapes had completely covered his suit, dragging him down into the black city. His light flickered once, twice, and then vanished. We were rising. We were escaping. Or so we thought. The depth gauge started climbing. 13,000 meters. 12,000 meters. Thorn let out a breath. "He did it," he whispered. "We made it." But the ocean hadn't let go yet. Thump. The sound came from the roof of the sub, right above the hatch. It was heavy, wet. "SC Ray! I!" Metal claws dragged across the titanium skin. We weren't alone. One of them, or something bigger, had latched onto the hull before we took off. We were bringing a sample back to the surface, whether we wanted to or not. We were ascending at 10 meters per second, but the passenger wasn't letting go. Above us, the external communications array was ripped off. We heard the screech of tearing metal. "It's looking for a way in," Anya wept, unbuckling her seatbelt to scramble away from the hatch. The creature was intelligent. It knew that the hatch was the seam. It was digging its claws into the seal, trying to peel the Titan II open like an oyster. Thorn grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit. "If it breaches, I shoot!" he yelled. But a flare gun in a pressurized cabin is a death sentence. It gave up on the hatch and crawled down the side of the hull. Suddenly, the front viewport went dark. A face pressed against the glass. It was the same pale humanoid shape that took Miller. But up close, it was hideous. Translucent skin revealing dark veins pulsing underneath. 4 black, unblinking eyes staring at us with pure malice. It didn't scream. It tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. It was testing the strength. And then it smiled, a slit opening to reveal rows of transparent, needle-like teeth. We hit the 3,000-meter mark. The water outside began to shift from pitch black to a deep midnight blue. The creature shrieked. It wasn't the light that hurt it, it was the pressure change. These things evolved in the crushing weight of the bottom. As we rose, the pressure dropped rapidly. The creature's body began to bloat. Its translucent skin started to blister and tear. Black ichor leaked from its eyes and mouth. We were bringing it into an environment that was toxic to it, the surface. At 500 meters, the first rays of the sun pierced the water. To us, it was hope. To the creature, it was fire. The sunlight hit its skin, and it recoiled as if burned by acid. It couldn't handle the radiation. With a final gurgling scream that vibrated through the hull, it let go. We watched it spiral back down into the abyss, a trailing cloud of black blood behind it. "It's gone!" Thorn gasped, dropping the flare gun. "We beat it!" But the ocean wasn't done with us yet. Whoosh! The Titan II broke the surface, launching into the air before crashing back down into the waves. The bright tropical sun blinded us. The GPS reconnected. The radio crackled to life. "Titan, this is Atlas Control. We have your signal. You were gone for 12 hours. Report status." I looked at the empty seat where Miller used to be. I looked at the scratches on the glass. "Atlas," I whispered, do not come get us yet. We need to check for contamination." Because I saw something on the glass. A smear of black slime that was moving. The crane winch whined as it pulled us from the water. We swung over the deck of the Atlas and lowered onto the cradle. When the hatch finally popped open, the fresh air smelled sweet. But the deck crew wasn't cheering. They were staring at the hull. The Titan II looked like it had been chewed on. Deep gouges marred the titanium skin. And covering the landing gear was a thick layer of that black, gelatinous silt from the trench floor. "Don't touch it!" I yelled as a deckhand reached out. "Get the hazmat team!" My warning came too late. A young crewman named Davis had already wiped a glob of the black slime off a sensor port. It didn't behave like mud, it hissed. The slime reacted to the UV radiation of the sun and the rubber of his glove. Davis screamed as the material melted through his protection and touched his skin. It wasn't an acid burn, it was a biological absorption. The black goo sank into his pores instantly, leaving a tattoo-like web of dark veins spreading up his forearm. The infection had boarded the ship. We dragged Davis to the infirmary. Dr. C. Anya, still recovering from the pressure trauma, tried to stabilize him, but his vitals were impossible. His body temperature dropped to 80 degrees, his skin turned cold and clammy, and he was thirsty, but not for water. He swatted away the canteen. He grabbed a bag of saline IV solution and bit into it like a wild animal, swallowing the salt water greedily. "The ocean," he rasped, his voice sounding wet and gurgling. "I need the salt!" He wasn't dying. He was adapting to a new environment. Thorne watched from the observation window, fascinated and horrified. "It's rewriting his DNA," he whispered. "It's turning him into one of them." Davis convulsed. The sound of tearing flesh filled the room. On the side of his neck, 3 vertical slits opened up. Gills! They fluttered, gasping for water that wasn't there. His eyes rolled back, the whites dissolving into pure black darkness. He looked at Dr. Anya, not with recognition but with hunger. The black slime wasn't waste, it was a mutagen, and we had brought gallons of it on board. Security tried to sedate him. The needle broke on his skin, which had hardened into translucent scales. Davis snapped the restraints like paper. He didn't run for the exit, he ran for the dark. He tore through the ventilation grate and disappeared into the ship's bowels. Minutes later, the screams started from the engine room. The Atlas was a research vessel, not a warship. We were floating in the middle of the Pacific with a predator in the vents. And the radio just died. Something had chewed the cables. "Why?" The captain ordered a lockdown. "Stay in groups of 2. Arm yourselves with flare guns and axes." But the creature was smart. It retained Davis's memories, but had the instincts of the trench. It cut the power to the lower decks first. Then it started hunting. It didn't attack groups. It waited for the stragglers. The mechanic who went to check a fuse, the cook who went to lock the pantry. One by one, they vanished. No screams, just the sound of wet dragging and the drip, drip, drip of black slime left on the floor. At 02,000 hours, the main generators died. The hum of the engine stopped, replaced by the howling wind outside. "It killed the lights," Thorne realized, his flashlight beam shaking. "It hates the light. It wants to turn the ship into the trench." We were adrift in the ocean, in the dark, with a predator that could see perfectly in pitch blackness. The Atlas was no longer a ship. It was a metal cave. And we were the krill waiting to be eaten. Miller's second in command, Chief Evans, led a team to the engine room to restore power. What they found wasn't a malfunction. It was a nest. The turbines were caked in the black resin. And stuck to the walls like flies in a spiderweb were the missing crew. They weren't dead. They were cocooned in the translucent slime, their eyes moving rapidly under sealed lids. They were being kept fresh. Or worse, they were incubating something. "Burn it," Evans ordered. Burn it all. But before he could light the torch, the vent above him exploded open. As if the monster wasn't enough, the barometer bottomed out. A typhoon had formed rapidly, too rapidly. 60-foot waves hammered the Atlas. The ship pitched and rolled violently, throwing us against the bulkheads. It felt like the ocean itself was angry that we had stolen something from the bottom. Lightning flashed, and for a second I saw it. The Davis thing was on the smokestack, screaming at the storm. It wasn't afraid of the water. It was calling to it. It was signaling the deep. I managed to bypass the damaged circuits in the comms room. I got a weak signal out. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday! This is the Atlas! Unknown contagion! Hostiles on board! Do not approach!" I don't know if anyone heard me, but something else did. As I looked out the rain-streaked window, a flash of lightning revealed the sea. The waves weren't just water. Rising from the depths, dwarfing the ship, was a tentacle, thick as a skyscraper, covered in the same glowing eyes we saw in the trench. The infection on the ship was just a beacon. The real monster had followed us up. We thought we were fighting a contagion. We were wrong. We were fighting a summons. The tentacle crashed down on the bridge with the force of a falling skyscraper. Metal shrieked and glass shattered. The Atlas, a vessel weighing thousands of tons, was tossed aside like a bath toy. I was thrown onto the deck, sliding toward the railing. Looking up, I saw the main body of the creature breaching the surface. It blocked out the storm. It was an island of scales and eyes, rising to reclaim what was stolen. Thorn was clinging to the railing near the lifeboat launch. He wasn't trying to save the crew. He was clutching the waterproof case containing the hard drives and the sample. "It's mine!" he screamed at the ocean. "I paid for it!" The mutated Davis thing skittered over the wet deck. It didn't attack him. It embraced him. Thorn screamed as the creature's black slime fused with his skin, melting them together. They weren't fighting. They were joining. The infection wanted to bring the owners back down to the city. The keel snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The Atlas broke in two. The stern, where the engine room and the nest were, was pulled straight down. I watched as the ocean churned white, then black. The Leviathan didn't just sink the ship, it dragged it. It took the steel, the technology, the bodies, and the infection back to the darkness where they belonged. I managed to cut the lines of a life raft just before the bow capsized. I was alone in the storm. The storm broke at dawn. The ocean was calm, as if nothing had happened. But the water wasn't blue. It was covered in a thin, iridescent film of black oil, not fuel slime, the residue of the creature. I drifted for 3 days before a Japanese fishing trawler picked me up. I didn't tell them what happened. I told them it was a rogue wave. If I told them the truth, that the Mariana Trench isn't a geological formation but a nest, they would go looking. And we cannot let anyone go back there. That was 6 months ago. Since then, 3 commercial airliners have vanished over the Pacific. 2 nuclear submarines have gone silent. The governments know. They've quietly redrawn the maritime maps. They call it a naval exercise zone, but it's a quarantine. The bloop is getting louder. It's not just one heartbeat anymore, it's thousands. The ocean covers 70% of our planet, and we just found out we don't own any of it. Stay on the land, stay in the light. Because the deep is awake.